Chapter 57, The Backstory, Part 3, Hanyu's POV. One night, when we were further than any of our maps had gone, this asshole of a sea monster popped out of nowhere and started battering our ships. Antony rapped his knuckles on the wall behind him. They're made of enchantments and defenses almost as much as wood, which is how they've lasted so long. But why push our luck? We fought it and killed it. He said it casually, but Hanyu perked up. He thought that they might be coming to the part of the story he knew. What we didn't know is that there was an island not far away. When we spotted it and landed there the next night, it turned out the fishermen had seen the whole thing. We didn't speak the language, but they managed to make us understand that the monster had been terrorizing them for years, and they were thrilled to have it gone. They were impressed with our strength and speed and dark skin and everything, and they had come to the conclusion that we were something supernatural. Hanyu would have said immediately understood rather than come to the conclusion, but he had done an excellent job of restraining his desire to interrupt and didn't care to start now. Antony pursed his lips. Claudia got a funny look on her face and told everyone to play along and she would meet with the tribal elders. That night, off we went to attack a neighboring tribe and get them away from some contested land. Within a week, it was all set in motion. The Taishan tribe was sitting on the best farmland the coast had to offer. We were gods, and we had our first batch of offerings. That wasn't exactly how they told the story in The Arrival of the Gods, or The Road to the Great Serpent, or The Establishment of Taisha, or any of Hanyu's other favorite ballads or lays about the founding of the nation, but he supposed it was close enough. It was easy enough to rationalize under the circumstances. At first, they gave us prisoners who were condemned to death. My first offering, I came to understand as we picked up more of the language, was a murderer who had killed his own wife and children. Prisoners? The thought irritated Hanyu. The ancient kings had dared to give the gods prisoners? Yes, he had been a slave all his life, but he had been raised and educated with more care than most nobles' children. It offended his dignity to think that the honor of serving his master as he did had once been given to prisoners, murderers even. He let out a little huff, but Antony didn't seem to notice. So we all told each other that really this wasn't so bad, the god said. We weren't killing them outright or on purpose, though, of course, there were accidents. Feeding us didn't seem like such an awful alternative to execution. When a few months passed and they started handing over slaves as well, it was an easy enough step. We all told each other that even if we took their blood, we would be kinder to them than their old masters, and it would be all right. As one of the slaves in question, Hanyu felt that had been exactly his experience. Kenta's, too, though he was beginning to have his doubts about whether Asao was better off here than he had been in the temple. It went on like that for a while, Antony said, tracing indistinguishable shapes in the bedstead with his fingertip and avoiding Hanyu's gaze. At first we thought we would stay in Taisha forever. We learned the language and defended the borders. It started to feel like we might be able to have some kind of life after all. But before too long, we realized we still need to drink elf blood once a year to keep from going mad. Something else would have to be done. What would it have been like if the gods had stayed in Taisha as they had originally intended? Would there still have been a human king, or would they have ruled the city directly? Would Antony still have found Hanyu and chosen him? It was hard to imagine the city without his king. The royal line had endured for hundreds of years. Anyhow, as far as Hanyu knew, the gods didn't generally involve themselves in human politics. The king provided the offerings and asked the gods' aid when the borders were in danger. Perhaps the only difference would be that it would all happen within the city walls, and Hanyu wouldn't have had even a chance of getting to see other lands or strange beasts. His master was still speaking. We established the temple once it was clear we'd have to return to our seafaring ways and come back for offerings intermittently, and that was harder to agree to, but someone, I think it was Marcus now that I look back, pointed out that it would be better to have offerings who were raised for the journey and have no close ties than to carry people off from their homes and families. So, in the end, we agreed to that too. I'm beginning to wonder whether that was the right decision. Hanyu tried not to flinch. Had he truly done so poorly that he'd made Antony question the institution that had brought them together in the first place? Was Hanyu's incompetence endangering the traditions of an age? We set off and began our routines of battling elven ships and sea monsters, the god continued. I made friends with all my offerings, or at least we got along well enough. I didn't expect to outlive them by too wide a margin. Hanyu goggled at him, confused, and he shrugged even though he hadn't lifted his eyes to see the movement. How would we have known? The god asked. By then, we were starting to understand that our aging wasn't proceeding like it should, but it wasn't until we'd been floating around with no changes for about 200 years that we started to whisper about immortality. The way it seems to work is that our bodies are frozen the way they were the night of the curse. If we cut our hair, it grows back to the exact same length and not a finger's breadth more. Cloelia gives herself new tattoos from time to time, but they bleed out in a few hours. Any little scratches or calluses we had that night, we have forever, but nothing new leaves a mark. Did that mean that all of Antony's scars had come from before their godhood, before they fought armies and sea monsters? Hanyu barely managed to close his teeth over the question. I was a little afraid to experiment with my new body, his master said. I didn't want an answer one way or the other. But then, about 400 years in, I got an offering who thought it was all just fascinating and wanted to dissect me. He reached for the third portrait, the one of the man with feeding scars and a mischievous smirk. Their name was Sana, Antony said. Hanyu knew that plenty of the gods were genderless and called they, like Lord Iolvita, who Antony had just been trying to convince him to live with, as were many of the Taishan people outside the temple. Still, he'd never met an offering who would dare to refer to themselves that way, given that the pack required 30 flawless young men. This Sana must have been a very bold individual. He mentally recategorized the painting from man to person. Antony was still talking. They were brilliant about bodies and biology and all of that, and so they were pretty interested when they saw how mine worked. Our healer, Julia, ended up taking them as an apprentice, but they still lived with me. They said I needed them to look after me, which was ridiculous because they never remembered to tidy anything. I used to clean up after them like a servant, but that was all right. By then, the ship ran smoothly, and I only had to organize things when we would fight a battle. Hanyu was surprised to find how little the idea surprised him. He could easily imagine Antony tidying and grumbling about it, scolding half-heartedly in the wake of someone he loved. What were they like? He asked, hoping to fill in the blank that his imagination held of that beloved person. Antony smiled, soft and so sad that Hanyu almost wished he hadn't asked. Sana was quick. Their movements, their mind, their decisions, their tongue. Oh, they had a vicious tongue. When we fought, they could say the most horrible things. I still flinch when I recall some of them. But they were always sorry afterwards, truly sorry, and they fought ferociously to control their temper. They learned to walk away from me or take a few breaths and try to relax so they wouldn't say anything too harsh. Hanyu reflected that apparently he ought to adopt that tactic as well. Antony's smile widened, losing some of its melancholy. It didn't always work, of course, but it thrilled me to see that struggle, even when they lost it and said something cruel. I was awestruck to watch someone working so hard to be better, not just about their temper either. As soon as they recognized something about themselves they wanted to change, they were hyper-vigilant about it. The god chuckled, and it was almost a truly happy sound. They weren't as dedicated in all their pursuits as they were about self-improvement, of course. They were one of those people who are so used to being brilliant that they would try hobbies and give up if they weren't good at them right away. That other painting in the chest was one they tried to do of me. Awful, isn't it? But bodies and medicine came to them amazingly easily. They used to get so excited when I was injured and needed stitching up that they'd jump up and down and squeal, so of course I went and fell in love with them. They loved me too, eventually, especially after I actually did let them dissect me. You let them what? Hanyu squawked, and Antony gave a self-conscious shrug. Just a little bit, he muttered defensively. As an anniversary present. Julia knew which nerves to sever so I wouldn't feel any pain, and the way Sana's eyes lit up and they chattered on and on about everything they'd learned afterwards. If you could have seen how happy it made them, you would have let them do it too. I would not! Well, it wasn't going to do me any lasting harm. Another shrug. It was in the name of science and all that. Anyhow, that's not the point of the story. We had 10 years together, and in the humans' vampire stories back home, a vampire could turn someone else into a vampire if he drank a little of their blood and they drank a little of his. I thought that since so much of the rest of the curse was based on vampire stories, maybe... It sounds stupid now. Once again, Hanyu's heart sank. Wait, stop while it's still nice. I told Sana about my theories, and they wanted to try it. We thought, well, even if it didn't work, what harm would it do? I would only take a mouthful of blood. We never thought to worry about how my blood would change things. I was so fucking reckless." Antony spat the last words, digging his fingernails into his palms until Hanyu half expected to see blood drip onto the coverlet. "I gave them my blood first," the god ground out. "They only took a mouthful, right from my arm. Then I leaned in, but almost as soon as I tasted them, it was wrong. It was all wrong. It tasted... There's no way my blood had gotten into theirs, but for some reason, I felt like I couldn't stop, but that's probably just a fucking excuse. I probably could have, but I was so fucking weak and I didn't. And finally they just slumped over on me and I already knew they were dead, but I sat there shaking them and bawling until Theo heard and found me. It was stupid. Anyone could see they were dead." Antony almost snarled the last words, and then he went on speaking so fast that Hanyu could barely keep up. "I killed Sana and Valerius both because I was stupid and selfish and wanted to keep them close, even though anyone could see that it was better for them to be far away from something like me. I destroy every good thing I touch. You're good, Hanyu. You're so good that a harsh word to me is the worst thing you've ever done. I refuse to murder you the way I murdered them. You see why you need to go somewhere else?" "No!" Hanyu lunged across the bed and gathered the god's small, stiff body against his chest. His tears dropped onto Antony's silver head as Hanyu squeezed. "I'm not going anywhere," he sobbed. "You'll have to drag me, and Lord Theodora and Lord Thaddeus won't take me if you drag me to them. I want to be with you forever. You said I could. You promised." Antony's voice was muffled by Hanyu's chest. "That was selfish of me. I shouldn't have..." "You did!" Hanyu shrieked into his ear. "You swore I could stay, and I will, and if you try to make me leave, I'll keep coming back again and again, and you'll have to kill me to make me stop." "Fuck!" Antony's astonishment was audible even as Hanyu pressed him even tighter to his chest. "I wouldn't ever..." "Calm down, Hanyu. There's no need for anything drastic." "I'm not being drastic. I'm telling you what would happen if you tried to make me leave." Hanyu wasn't entirely sure that was true. If Antony sent him away because he wanted him gone, he would go in a flood of tears, but he would obey. For his god to send him away like this, though, so he could sit alone with his pain and talk himself into believing he didn't deserve any better. Hanyu probably wouldn't manage to be quite as tenacious as he was promising if it came down to it, but in the moment he felt wild enough that it didn't seem impossible. "I'm staying," he told his master severely, though still through his tears. Antony's body finally relaxed against his. The god's stiff shoulders softened, his neck bent, and he allowed Hanyu to mold their forms against each other. "All right," Antony whispered. "You're staying."